to work this budget without objection. We will start off with Stephen. Stephen, if you'd give us an overview of the judicial branch budget.
Sure thing. The budget for the judicial branch begins on page 1135. I'm going to keep my remarks fairly brief since I understand that Chief Justice Marla Lukert should be in attendance with the committee today, and several employees of the judicial branch are with us on WebEx as well. So as a reminder, the primary function of the judicial branch is the administration of justice throughout the state of Kansas. The governor is statutorily required to include the budget submission as is. So save for a few exceptions, the governor's recommendation will be the same as the agency's request. If we'll just jump into the fiscal year 2021 budget, it begins on page 1141. For 21, the agency requests about $150.5 million. About $112.1 million of this comes from SGF. This is a slight decrease from the amount that was approved by the legislature last year of about $796,000. This decrease is primarily due to lower employer contributions for retirement. There's some portions of it for the employee retirement system, and there's some portion of it for the Capers Judge system. You can see a breakdown of the various categories of expenditure down below. The governor's recommendation for fiscal year 21 is the same as the agency request, but for two adjustments. The first is that there is an additional $3.5 million in the governor's recommendation for COVID-19 relief funding. These are distributions from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. They were made after the agency submitted their budget, so in terms of timing, they weren't reflected there. You only see these numbers reflected in the governor's recommendation. The agency used these for items such as PPE, IT support, and creating various online portals and systems to allow for remote work. The other change that's included within the governor's recommendation is a decrease of a little over $525,000, all from SGF for the governor's allotment plan. This includes a moratorium on Capers death and disability payments. And for this one, this would require legislative action in order to effectuate. For fiscal year 22, you'll see this begin on page 1143. For this year, the agency requests $175.6 million. About $138.9 million of this comes from SGF. This is a fairly sizable increase from the previous year, about $25.1 million. This increase is primarily due to the agency's enhancement requests. We'll cover those in a bit later on. These increases are offset by some lower expenditures excuse me, for eCourt, as well as for some office equipment purchases in the previous year that aren't reflected, that don't occur again for fiscal year 22. Again, you'll see these expenditures broken out by various categories of expenditure down below. Now, I'd like to point the committee's attention to the enhancements. They are on 1144. For this budget submission for fiscal year 22, the agency requests 3 enhancements. The items include salary increases for judges, salary increases for non-judge employees, as well as a request for some new court service officer positions. So I'll just go through these one by one fairly briefly. The salary increase for judges, there's about $9.4 million of this, $9.4 million requested in enhancement funding for a 25.4% increase for the salaries of the judges and justices within the state of Kansas. If you'll recall, the judicial branch requested this item last year. The legislature did not approve. It pushed the discussion off to omnibus, which wound up being very protracted due to the coronavirus pandemic. The judicial branch indicates that salaries remain uncompetitive despite the increases that they have received in previous fiscal years. They specifically cite a study from the National Center for State Courts, which ranked Kansas district judge pay as 48th in the nation. The agency also says that providing this enhancement funding would improve their ranking to about 25th in the nation, on par with our surrounding states. The second enhancement request is for a salary increase for non-judge employees. There's about $10.8 million of this requested. This request varies based on position. The main guiding principle is to bring various positions to market level pay. So increases will range from about 2.7% to 18.9%, depending on the position we're talking about. Again, the judicial branch requested this item last year. The legislature did not approve. It pushed it off to omnibus, which wound up being protracted. The judicial branch indicates that the average time it takes to fill a position now is about 54 days, which results in a number of inefficiencies for its operations. It relies on For this request, it relies on information from the National Center for State Courts, as well as adjustments made to the Consumer Price Index to determine the funding needed to reach market level for its various positions. Now, the third enhancement request is new for this year. It's about 4.3 million and 70 FTE for new court service officer positions. These are more commonly known as probation officers. So as a brief overview, CSOs, court service officers, have both statutory and non-statutory responsibilities. In 2019, the National Center for State Courts conducted a weighted caseload study that examined the workloads of over 300 CSOs. The judicial branch, in response, formed a CSO workload study group to review each task and responsibility of the CSOs in its system. The work group issued its report to the judicial branch in 2019. It concluded that there wasn't enough personnel to adequately perform all CSO statutory duties. The report further indicates that the judicial branch would need to hire about 70 additional court service officers in order to reach that capacity. So that is what we see before us today, the increase of about 4.3 million and 70 FTE. On page 1149, you'll see a breakdown of the various funds and funding sources included for the judicial branch, as well as some details on where those funds come from. Page 1150 goes over the various programs included within the judicial branch. There are 6 main programs and numerous sub-programs organized underneath them. I'm happy to go into additional detail on any of these items if the committee would like. Otherwise, I would defer to the Chief Justice's testimony. The one item I would like to point out is a quick update on eCourt, which you'll see on page 1156. It's currently live in 23 counties, and it's scheduled to go live for the remainder of the state in the next year or two. You can see a list of the schedule for eCourt on 1156. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on the judicial branch's budget as presented. Otherwise, I defer to remarks by the agency.
Questions of Stephen, committee? Seeing none, we'll move forward to those who are appearing today to testify. Just a couple of notes for those testifying on WebEx. Please do not read your written testimony. We do have that in front of us, but do hit the key points or any issues that have not been previously covered by other conferees. It is our intention to work this budget at the end of today's meeting, but we do need to have the time to be able to do that. So please be brief and to the point throughout the testimony. And with that, here in person, we do have the Chief Justice Lugert. Welcome to the committee.
Oh, maybe not. Okay. Now we'll try that. Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Clays and the other members of the committee. We will try to truncate our testimony, and I will refer you at various points to points in my written testimony. But I do want to just give you a brief overview about the impact of the past year on the judicial branch. And of course, reminding you that the judicial branch is a core function of the government. And the stability and availability of that judicial forum presided over by trained jurists is a fundamental foundation of our republic and essential to our ordered society. The inherent value of our strong judicial system cannot be overstated, nor can a dollar amount really be placed on it. As I said, the events of 2020 deserve some attention because the impact on our branch has been enormous, as it has on all other aspects of our lives. Our employees and judicial officers have personally struggled with the disruption caused by the COVID, with many overcoming the grief of losing a coworker, loved ones, or personally struggling with the disease. But through it all, courts have never stopped. Instead, judges and employees have put their love of their community and their neighbors over self. They've persevered and they've adapted. They've continued to resolve cases So our chief judges are reporting essentially no backlogs in any area other than jury trials, a few exceptions. But that has presented us with extraordinary challenges because of the large number of people that are come into the courthouses. They are some of the busiest governmental buildings in our state. So we have had to re-engineer virtually everything we do. Jury trials have presented especially extraordinary circumstances and challenges because of the large number of people that are involved in a jury trial, especially during jury selection, and the long length of time that a jury trial can take, sometimes weeks, of close, what normally would have been very, very close proximity with each other. And so we've had to adapt. But we understood the urgent need to access courts. Neglected or abused children, victims of domestic violence who seek safety, individuals who are a danger to themselves or others, and other vulnerable Kansans needed daily court access. And I'm proud of the many innovations and the hard work of the Kansas Judicial Branch during 2020 and beyond that have resulted in that continuous access to justice. Courts moved outdoors. We held court in arenas, fairground buildings, civic centers, theaters. Judges and employees redesigned courtrooms and courthouses. And like I said, really every aspect of the proceeding. Fortunately for us, the legislature gave us the authority to use video conferencing technology for court hearings last year, and we have conducted tens of thousands of video hearings over this time. At the same time that the pandemic disrupted our procedures, it disrupted our budget. As you know, we receive a portion of our budget from docket and surcharge fees. Such things as fewer traffic tickets being written and the disruption in the lives of attorneys and their clients resulted in a fairly dramatic drop in filing fee revenues. On January 26th, I testified before the House Appropriations Committee and laid much of the detail of this out and requested $7.4 million to replace the revenue lost during the pandemic through the end of this fiscal year. So before getting into our budget request, I'd like to touch on that for just a brief moment. I will explain that the portion of the fees that are allocated to the judicial branch flow into two funds. One is our docket fee fund and one our electronic filing and management fee fund. Last year, that fee fund, last fiscal year, I should say, fee fund accounted for about 1/5 of our judicial branch expenditures. From March through June of 2020, we received $2.7 million less in the docket fee than had been budgeted in just that few months. So that was an approximate 10% loss for that fund. When I spoke to the House Appropriations Committee in January, I explained to them that that decline had continued, although trending upward. For that we had lost $2 million during the first 5 months of the fiscal year when compared to the same period in the last fiscal year, comparing revenue to revenue in those time periods. Combined, the docket fee fund and the electronic fee fund for that period sustained a 16% loss. So combining that with what we lost in the prior fiscal year, we're now at $4.7 million. I reported then and can report to you now that that revenue stream continues to fall short. We don't know what to expect for the rest of the fiscal year with any certainty, but if current trends continue, we will be looking at a loss of another $2.7 million. Again, comparing pre-COVID numbers to current. That will bring us to a total loss of the $7.4 million. It was obvious to us very early in the pandemic that we were going to sustain this loss, so we immediately cut all expenditures we could. By statute, the first $3.1 million of our share of the filing fee revenue goes into that electronic management and filing fee fund that's used for our e-court projects. Because you have given in that legislative prioritization, funding for that has not been cut, implementation has continued, and the funding for the centralized case management system has remained secure throughout the pandemic and the rollout is ongoing, as Mr. Wu indicated. What we had to do then is reduce our only other true expenditure, because 91% of our budget is salary. So we have cut drastically on our salary income, our salary by freezing positions. We'd hope to begin to be able to fill some of those positions by this time, but we, with the continued loss, have had to do so at a much slower pace than we would hope. Replacing lost funds would allow us to fill many of those vacancies that are currently being kept open and help us to absorb the docket fee revenue loss. With that, I will turn to our budget request, as it's stated, in the three areas. I will say that the understaffing that we've experienced by the lost revenue has caused considerable stress on our employees and our judges. And that stress has been exacerbated by the reality that taking steps to spread out and reduce the number of people coming into the courthouses has in many ways multiplied the work of our employees. These stresses and demands have piled up on top of the morale-busting fact that our employees and judges are receiving wages that are significantly below salary market. So today, I repeat a plea the judicial branch has made for many years. Please bring our salaries to a competitive level so that we can attract and retain a workforce capable of providing an efficient system of justice. I respectfully ask you to approve our base budget of approximately $151 million and our approximate $24.5 million enhancement request. Both the base budget and the enhancement, as Mr. Wu indicated, were passed through by the governor, as she's required to do by statute. And we would ask the committee to fully support our budget request as well. Our enhancement request is broken into the three segments, and I want to first point out what was dropped from last year's budget. That may be a question in some minds. Because last year we had asked for judges and related support staff. We did not renew that request this year. That need has not gone away, but at the time we submitted our budget request in late summer, a new judicial workload study was underway, and we knew that in the 2022 session, we would be able to come to you with updated data about those needs. Plus, we had just completed the CSO work study, which as Mr. Wu laid out for you, revealed a substantial need for 70 additional court services officers. So we put the focus there and are asking to increase our budget to account for that, as well as for the market rate increases for our employee and judicial salaries. Let me explain a little more. Mr. Wu referred to the CSOs, or court service officers, as probation officers, which they are, but they do much, much more than that. They are responsible for risk assessments of criminal defendants, juvenile offenders, and others. They provide that appropriate level of supervision, but they provide investigative reports and pre-sentence reports and other things for the judges. They then supervise those individuals often on a daily basis. In other words, these are people who are essential to the safety of your community. And quite simply, they are stretched beyond their capacity. The salary increase is connected to our request for the CSOs because, frankly, without the salary increase, it's very difficult and unlikely that we would be able to fill those positions. The CSOs have 3 classification levels. They are under market between 16 and 18.9%. And there are hidden costs with those high levels of caseloads. Well-trained, knowledgeable court services officers prevent jail and prison, and if they lead to successful probation outcomes. Conversely, an unsuccessful outcome results in incarceration at a high cost to the individual, the state of Kansas, and its taxpayers. Our other employees' salaries range from 2.7 to 18.9% below market, and I will leave to the other conferees to talk a little bit more about the impact of that. And then I will also refer you to our written testimony, where we have laid out the history of the periods of time over which our employees have had legislative recognition that we are below market, but not pay increases to make up for that time. I've learned that there is some misunderstanding that the judicial branch was included in the Hay study, the Hay Group compensation study that resulted in executive branch employees receiving several pay increases. The judicial branch was not a part of that study. Instead, there was a parallel provision that applied to the judicial branch, and there was a 3-year plan to increase their wages incrementally by 15.75%. 1 year was funded. The final 2 years have never been funded. Also, similar history for our judges who have gone years without pay increases. Last year when I testified about the budget, our judges ranked 41st in adjusted salary cost of living across our country. That was for our trial court, our district court judges. We dropped to 48th this year. So our judges now rank 48th out of the 50 states. And again, that history is laid out, as is some data that indicates why we can say we are so far under market. Comparing ourselves to prosecutors across the state, to other positions, and I included in my written testimony a recent job posting at a state university for an assistant deputy general counsel. That position only requires 8 years of experience, and it would pay more than our judges would receive even if you give them the full amount of the raise that we have requested. We are simply under market to be able to attract the quality of employees and judges that Kansans deserve and expect. So in closing, I'd borrow just a few words from a chief judge recently who expressed his deep concern about the ability to attract and retain judges. As he pointed out, it's a risk, and it's a risk that manifests itself through years later in wrongful convictions, reversals on appeals, employee and judicial burnout, and lack of justice. I ask again that you please consider our request to bring our employees to market value. There are so many risk factors associated with getting justice right. In order to avoid that disastrous result, we need to take action. We ask you to please bolster the investment of the state of Kansas in a core function of government, that of providing justice to all. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I will turn over to our conferees. We have Chief Judge Brad Ambrosier from Elkhart, a court administrator from Topeka, Leah Dawn Welch, and Attorney Jim Robinson from Wichita, and then Stephanie Button is our Chief CFO is here to answer questions and provide some brief testimony.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
We appreciate you appearing in person today in front of the committee. We will move now to our WebEx conferees. If you do a quick mic check, Chief Judge Brad Ambrosier. You'll need to take yourself off mute. There we go.
Working?
We got you. Yep.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
I'm having to hold down my space button to get off mute. My click didn't work. Chairman Clays, is someone who has spent the last year doing the job of hearing testimony remotely, I certainly appreciate and value being brief in giving such testimony. So I will do so today. You have my written testimony, and I'm just going to hit a few of the highlights of that written testimony. As you've been told, my name is Brad Ambrosier. I'm the Chief Judge of the 26th Judicial District, which is in the very southwest corner of the state of Kansas. I'm bordered to the south by Oklahoma, to the west by Colorado. You simply cannot be further south and west and remain in this state than my judicial district. Cover 6 counties, so a large geographical area and a relatively small population. I had the opportunity to speak to this committee last year concerning budgets, and I spent a great deal of my time talking about the dedication of our employees. And I certainly believe everything I told the committee during that time. But in reality, I tremendously undersold the dedication that exists with judicial branch employees. And that was driven home when shortly after I returned from Topeka, the COVID-19 pandemic began in earnest. The largest metropolitan area in my district is Liberal, Kansas, which is home to National Beef. And as I'm sure the committee's aware, the beef packing industry was hit tremendously hard and early with COVID. In fact, Liberal was one of the hot spots in the nation. We knew that we had problems immediately. National Guard was activated. Our local hospital reached near capacity very, very early in the pandemic. We became aware we were going to have to do something different with our court system, and I made the decision that we needed to reduce the number of employees who were present physically at the courthouse. When I made that decision, I did not anticipate the most difficult part of following that through was to physically get the employees to leave. You have incredibly dedicated people who did not want to leave the work that was before them, even faced with that pandemic. I literally had to turn the lights out and tell them, you must leave the courthouse in order to get them out. The push from that day has been to get back to our normal operations. I've seen absolutely heroic actions on behalf of my clerks. We've seen clerks with no medical training who we use as a very front line to take temperatures, ask questions, and determine who gets to enter the courthouse facility. Have clerks who have performed functions for decades asked to totally change the way in which they perform those functions, and they have done so for the sole purpose of being able to continue to provide the access to justice that we are able to provide to the people in Kansas. I could go on about the dedication that we have seen from these employees, and it's in my written testimony. But when you're dealing with employees, the work that you get is part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the amount of compensation that they receive. And as I think has been pointed out repeatedly, we simply are not up to market on the compensation that we give our employees. A result that we see in my district over and over is that entry-level clerks at the district court level are basically viewed as a commodity for other county governments to take advantage of when they have hiring needs. We have seen clerks lured away from the district court to go to work for the county attorney's office in Seward County, for example, over and over and over. The sole reason for this is the financial benefit they receive from leaving employment of the judicial branch and being employed by county government. We see the same thing happen even more dramatically for positions that require higher education level or higher training. Example that I give in my written testimony deals with court reporters. When I first started as chief judge in the 26th Judicial District, we had 3 court reporters. Currently, we have 0. We have not had a single qualified applicant apply for our open court reporter positions. That became very problematic in dealing with jury trials reopening in our district. We simply do not have the facilities to have trials within the courthouse, so we have moved those trials to civic centers and other larger open public spaces. As such, it's important that we keep a record. In fact, we're required to do so by statute. Without having a court reporter available, we were required to purchase equipment so that we could adequately record those trials when they were held off-site locations. It's created incredible difficulties. So certainly, I think it is very clear that we're behind the market for our employees, and we're asking that you please consider the budget as submitted to bring those employees up to the market rate. The more difficult thing for me to talk about is the pay that judges received. Certainly, it's always been difficult for me to talk about wages when it directly affects my pocketbook. As a person who grew up in agriculture, I can tell you I don't ever remember any member of my family receiving what anyone would consider a regular paycheck. And except for a brief period right out of law school, I've always been a self-employed attorney. And in the event that I was unhappy with my pay, All I needed to do was work more hours or work harder, and I could increase that. That changed in 2009 when I went to the bench and became a state employee. Certainly, I would understand if my comments are taken with a grain of salt, but I am telling you that I am not concerned so much about my next paycheck and the amount of that check. I am greatly concerned about the future of the judges on the bench in the Kansas judicial branch. As I told you, Oklahoma's to my south. I'm approximately 1,000 feet from the state of Oklahoma right now. Judge John Parsley would be my counterpart in the state of Oklahoma, and I've known Judge Parsley for a long time as an attorney. He came onto the bench after me, so I'd never appeared in front of him as a judge, but from all the people that I talked to, he's doing a great job. Judge Parsley's salary is approximately $17,000 a year more than my salary. But what I think is more important than that salary is to look at who the last judge appointed to his judicial district was. And that judge is a young lady who was raised in Phillipsburg, Kansas. She graduated from KU Law School, and she was a practicing attorney in Liberal. She took the job as a district judge in the state of Oklahoma and then moved to Oklahoma. We are in competition with our surrounding states to get quality people on the bench. And certainly in my jurisdiction, we are in competition with the private sector to encourage quality judges to come onto the bench. I spend a lot of time talking with young lawyers who I think could be good judges and who would be my replacements. They have financial pressures that I did not have. They have 7 years of higher education with the incredible expense and student loans that go along with that. As a public employee, I don't have any secrets, and I'm more than happy to show them what my biweekly paycheck is. To a person that I have talked to, they have repeated the same. They would not be willing or able to work for that amount of money compared to how they are being compensated now. It is a substantial problem, and it is one that keeps getting larger. I understand that the requested pay increases are a large percentage, and that is very distasteful to a certain extent, but it's simply a result of the math, and the request would get us back to the average of our surrounding states, which is what we're requesting. Feels if I've spoke very quickly and very rapidly. Certainly do not want to take any more of your time and request that you approve the budget as requested. Thank you, Chairman.
Judge, appreciate your testimony here today by WebEx. We'll move down to Leadon Welch, a court administrator. Would you check your mic first? You'll need to turn yourself off mute.
Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear. Go ahead and get started.
Perfect. Thank you, Chairman Clays, President Masterson, and members of the committee for allowing me to present testimony today in support of the 2022 Judicial Branch budget request. I'm Lee Welch. I'm the court administrator for Shawnee County, which is the 3rd Judicial District. I am a past president of our Clerks and Court Administrators Association, as well as chair of our KDACA Legislative Committee, and one of nearly 1,600 non-judicial employees in the state of Kansas. Brevity has never been my strong suit, but I will do my best to keep my comments as short as possible. I've worked for the judicial branch for 28 years and bring a unique perspective from both a rural and now an urban setting. For 20 years, I was the chief clerk in the 12th Judicial District and clerk of the district court for Cloud County. These two districts are very similar, yet very different in many ways. All across the state, every district, every county is struggling with attracting and retaining qualified employees. And the primary reason for that is low pay. Stephen Wu referenced the National Center for State Court Salary Study in his remarks. And Chief Justice Lukert also mentioned that staff wages are between 2.7 and 18.9% below market rates. Low employee pay has created a number of issues across the state, including the inability to hire as well as to retain quality employees. As you may well know, hiring and training is an extremely time-sensitive and costly process. Our employees, especially our frontline employees, are faced with handling confidential legal material on a daily basis. The pay we're able to offer these employees simply doesn't match the legal consequences our staff face. We're simply struggling to attract candidates who possess the qualifications to fulfill these duties. In a recent vacancy we had here in Shawnee County for an administrative assistant position, our offer was declined by 2 individuals who had taken positions offering greater pay and less responsibilities. A lot of our new hires, including some of our long-term dedicated employees, have left the court system for positions in the private sector, positions with other government offices, be that state, local, or municipal. Some have even gone to retail for higher pay and lower responsibilities. At present, we have 8 vacant court services officer positions. We have 7 clerk's office positions and 2 court reporter positions. And we simply can't find qualified employees to come work for the pay we're offering, along with the duties that are required. There's a tremendous concern from administrators across the state that our courts are not attracting new employees. A lot of our staff is basically aging out. They're retiring and taking with them years and decades worth of historical knowledge. It's exceptionally hard to replace these people. In essence, the pay doesn't align with the duties and responsibilities of these positions, and that's why we're not getting qualified applications. I believe that fully funding the 2022 judicial branch budget is a step in the right direction. Every office across the state and every department in each court is facing these same battles and these same hurdles. Our court services office, as Justice Lukert discussed, are understaffed, and the rate of pay we offer them simply doesn't justify the level of education and training and certifications, not to mention the responsibilities required of these individuals. We're soon to lose our 3rd court services officer to the federal system. And it's increasingly difficult to find people that have those skills and the experience to fulfill these positions. Due to all of these factors, morale is a constant hurdle we face. And basically, all employees in the judicial branch face the same hurdle, and that's primarily affected by low pay. We're constantly juggle from an administration standpoint, being short-staffed in all of our departments, long-term unfilled positions, lack of suitable applicants, and applicants who are offered positions who take other jobs. The COVID-19 pandemic has simply exacerbated these issues. Our focus has literally become to do everything we can to keep the doors open and keep the lights on. The dedicated employees that work in all of the district courts across the state will tell you that they pride themselves on their work and they truly love their jobs. We simply must address the chronic underfunding of the third branch of government in the state of Kansas. I am respectfully requesting that you fully fund the 2022 judicial branch budget request, including the salary adjustment provisions, and show our employees that they're a valued asset to the state of Kansas. Thank you for your opportunity to speak today, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
We'll hold for questions at the end. We'll move now to Jim Robinson, an attorney. Jim, would you do a mic check real quick? You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we've got you loud and clear. Go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon. I am Jim Robinson. I'm a partner in the law firm Height, Fanning and Honeyman in Wichita. My practice involves representing businesses in court cases. I admire your service to Kansans, but I don't at all envy your task in these lean fiscal times. I know hard choices must be made, and I'm here to tell you about the experience I've gained from being in Kansas courts for 37 years. And from that experience, I can tell you justice is not a luxury. It's not a frill. It's not something that can fluctuate with the ups and downs of the economy or even the pandemic. In some cases, lives depend on justice. And in our work, there are very few do-overs for these clients. District courts are truly the emergency rooms for the ills of all that ail society. When spouses can't get along, when families can't pay their mortgages or their rent, when businesses fail to deliver needed parts and manufacturing lines stop, when credit card debts pile up, when frustrations about family finances boil over into domestic violence, it all ends up in our courts. And when our courts are not fully funded or well funded, justice slows and everyone pays. Due to belt tightening during the pandemic, and as you've heard, because of low pay, currently 11% of the branch positions are vacant. Let me tell you what that means. With fewer clerks and support staff, less administrative work and case management gets done. With fewer people to move cases through the court system, justice slows and judges become overburdened. It then takes longer to decide motions, issue order, and schedule trials. Now, you probably don't often hear about my clients, the businesses, and their perspective on this. So let me just spend a few minutes on that. Businesses are some of the heaviest users of our courts. They count on courts to timely resolve their disputes so their businesses can continue. Let's take a concrete example. Let's say I am the CEO of a small Wichita company. I have been sued by my Goliath competitor. My company is accused of stealing my Goliath's trade secrets. And given the high cost of litigation to defend my company, I am betting on my company's future. Well, let's say my case drags on for months or maybe years. No investor is willing to put money in my company. The lawsuit, whether it has merit or not, makes my company look like an unwise bet, and longer waiting times simply may be deadly for my business. And the truth is, the need for courts is greatest when the economy is the weakest. We know that. It's also true that the most vulnerable businesses and persons need courts the most when the economy turns south. And like the country's emergency rooms, the court's doors have always been open. And like the emergency rooms, our waiting rooms are always crowded. And the pandemic has only worsened our situation. It's much harder for cases needing jury trials to exit courts. Just take my county, for example, Sedgwick County. Our courtrooms were never designed with social distancing in mind. Using CARES Act funds, we have 2 courtrooms that have now been fitted out with plexiglass for criminal trials, and we have 1 courtroom for civil trials. But we have 28 judges in Sedgwick County. And this isn't intended to sound like a complaint, it's the reality. The COVID courtrooms, they look like plexiglass jungles because of all the plexiglass. As a practical matter, only the simplest cases can be tried. And I am very concerned that escalating backlogs of criminal and civil trials could overwhelm our courts and threaten our budgets when this pandemic finally ends. of great concern. You've heard about the need for 70 court services officers. I'm not going to spend much more time on that, but statistics are important. 19,970 felony and 11,523 misdemeanor cases were filed in 2020. We had courts supervising nearly 20,000 adults and juveniles who were on probation or pretrial supervision. And with growing caseloads and with short-staffed court service officer positions, that puts everyone at risk. It becomes a public safety problem. And failing to strengthen our courts during these times will directly impact businesses and taxpayers when they can least afford it. Now, I understand that in lean times, everyone has to tighten their belt. Everyone has to look for efficiencies. And for the past 10 years, the branch has been doing that. You've heard about it. I'm not going to repeat what's been said, but it's an important point to make. The branch has also requested the enhancements for the salaries, and you've heard plenty about that, and I'm not going to elaborate except to say this. The situation we have now for an attorney practicing in these courts and relying on court staff to move our cases along and judges to decide our cases, this situation is frankly an embarrassment. To have court staff who are better paid at a Burger King than at our court is a situation that has to be rectified. And for judges who went 9 fiscal years without a pay increase, we're now 48th in the nation. We have got to do better. Let me just conclude by saying the point at which I began. Access to justice isn't a luxury. In hard times like these, fully funded courts are needed now more than ever. I would say if we don't fund these courts, in the long run, taxpayers are going to pay far more. We are serving the needs of the public, and in these times, we simply need the funds. And so I would respectfully request that you fully fund the judicial branch request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We appreciate you appearing here today. Stephanie, you get the last word, and you've been left with about 2 minutes, so make it real succinct. Stephanie, if you're on, go ahead and test your mic.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we got you. Go ahead.
Okay. Chairman Clays, in the interest of time, I will just stand on my written testimony and I will answer any questions you have.
Fantastic. We appreciate that. Love the brevity. Committee, any questions for Stephanie or any of our conferees? Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to make sure I'm understanding the budget that was presented to us. Judge Lukert, and Stephanie can answer this, or Judge Lukert, the $7.4 million that were being shorted because of docket fees and other fees, is that amount included in the budget ask? I think there's 25.1 million as an increase. Is that included in there?
I'm sorry, you cut out momentarily, but were you asking about the pay increases?
No.
If they were included in the 24, okay.
Let me, I'm trying to look at the docket fees, the $2.7 million and the other fees, which I think we were just looking at a loss of about $7.4 million. And I just wanted to make sure that was in the budget request. I'm looking at 2022 right now. In terms of that increase of 25.1 million. Is that making that up? Is that included in that amount?
No, Senator Hawk, that is not included in that. At the time we submitted our budget on September 15th, we did not have a full picture, and we expected our docket fees to bounce back, which they have not fully done yet. So no, it's not included in that request.
Okay, and then let me ask Chief Justice, and you mentioned this in your testimony, what are the chances of some of those docket fees bouncing back when we get the courts opened up?
At this point, I would anticipate continued docket fee losses. For example, we just aren't seeing traffic is a huge chunk of this. And we're no longer a commuter society, if nothing else. I mean, just driving, you can see the drop of traffic. So that's one we don't expect to see rebounded. And I expect there are similar other kinds of things that are lost and will never be made up. Some things, attorneys have likely just delayed filing, so we could at some point see that. But whether we see that in this fiscal year seems more and more remote. So my request to the House Appropriations Committee when I was for either supplemental, or if we should receive, if there are any funds available for backfilling through any of the federal funds that have been or will be made available to us, that we be remembered in that.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you to everybody who appeared today. Thank you, Chief Justice Lukert. We really appreciate you coming to the committee room as well. Committee, as I mentioned, I would like to work this budget while we're here today, and I'll give you a few minutes to collect all your documents and review the different pieces of the budget before we do that. So let's just take a quick pause here, and then we'll get to it. All right, committee, we'll go ahead and open up the budget for FY 21 and 22 for the judicial branch. The chair will entertain a motion regarding the FY 21 and 22 budget for the judicial branch. For purposes of making that motion, the chair recognizes Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we approve the judicial branch budget for FY 21 and 22 as recommended by the governor.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Hawk. Discussion on the motion. Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also like to add to that. Would that be appropriate? I know each year we have $200,000 that we need, as I think is generally a pass-through for CASA. So I'd like to recommend that we add that into this motion.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Erickson. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll add that to the subcommittee report. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the subcommittee recommend Ways and Means hold for review at Omnibus the enhancement of 70 CSO positions to remain consistent with other agency FTE enhancements.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Hawk. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any further discussion on the budget? Senator Hawk.
I'd like to discuss, that was for the 70 CSO positions. I'd like to consider at Omnibus the salary increases.
Oh, yeah, we do that already.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's in there, and I'm sure the chief judge would like to report that back to staff.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at that also in terms of Omnibus. So that's implied in that motion.
It'll be in the subcommittee report automatically because of what was done in Ways and Means.
And I would also, since I asked that question about those lost docket fees and other fees, I'd like to look at potentially a supplemental at omnibus. And there may be other ways of looking at it. As the Chief Justice mentioned, there may be CARES 2 money available, but I'd certainly like to look at that and make sure we keep our courts functional. So is that appropriate to add that as an item for consideration?
So you want to review the docket fee losses
Yes,
as a supplemental?
the docket and other fee losses as a potential supplemental to be considered at omnibus.
Okay, yep, that sounds great. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Senator Erickson. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Without any further addendums, we'll have Senator Erickson close on her motion to approve the FY 21 and 22 budget for the judicial branch as amended by the subcommittee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So moved.
Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Hawk. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.